We have never, to this date, found a single connection between him and any of the 4 victims or the 2 surviving roommates.
Bryan Kohberger has been sentenced to life in prison, and now police and prosecutors are talking about the case and releasing hundreds of pages of reports that reveal new details about the investigation. I take a closer look at the new revelations, including what a Tinder date told police about what Kohberger said to her about knives. I'm Angenette Levy, and this is Crime Fix, coming to you from Boise, Idaho. I'm in front of the Ada County Courthouse, and this is where Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences earlier this week. The city of Moscow led this police investigation, and they've actually started releasing their investigative reports about the investigation into the murders of those 4 University of Idaho students, and I've been combing through all of them.
We believe we've achieved accountability and finality and certainty for everyone who has suffered from this, so we can try to move on.
Moscow police released hundreds of pages of reports after Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to those 4 consecutive life sentences. Judge Hippler wiped away tears from his eyes as the victims spoke, and he said he has even wondered why Kohberger murdered 4 beautiful young people. But then he said the why doesn't really matter.
But upon reflection, it seems to me, and this is just my own opinion, that by continuing to focus on why, we continue to give Mr. Kohberger relevance. We give him agency and we give him power. The need to know what is inherently not understandable makes us dependent upon the defendant to provide us with a reason, and that gives him the spotlight, the attention, and the power he appears to crave. Yet even if I could force him to speak, which legally I cannot, how could anyone ever be assured that what he speaks is the truth? Do we really believe, after all of this, he's capable of speaking the truth or of giving up something of himself to help the very people whose lives he destroyed? Rather, I suspect the so-called reason would be dished out in enticing, self-serving, and aggrandizing untruthful bits, leaving people wanting more information, more insight, and thus enhancing even further the power he seeks to hold. Because there is no reason for these crimes that could approach anything resembling rationality. No conceivable reason could make any sense. And in the end, the more we struggle to seek explanation for the unexplainable, the more we try to extract a reason, the more power and control we give to him. In my view, the time has now come to end Mr. Kohberger's 15 minutes of fame. It's time that he be consigned to the ignominy and isolation of perpetual incarceration.
Kohberger showed no emotion throughout the sentencing hearing. He appeared to grind his teeth at times, moving his jaw back and forth as the victims' family members and surviving roommates spoke about their grief, their pain, and their loved ones. Kohberger only moved a few times when he looked at the gallery as people clapped following a few of the victim impact statements. His face showed no expression, but the movement of his body and looking at the gallery seemed to indicate he was surprised by what was happening. And then it was his turn to possibly speak.
Legal team is prepared for the court to enter judgment.
All right, Mr. Kohberger, you have an opportunity to make a statement if you wish to. I take it you are declining.
I respectfully decline.
This is a Law&Crime legal alert. Did you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? And research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to these outcomes. Morgan & Morgan is stepping in to fight to hold food companies accountable. With decades of experience fighting large corporations, they are ready to stand up for families that deserve justice. So if your child under the age of 21 has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or fatty liver disease, visit www.forthepeople.com/food or scan the QR code on your screen to learn more. Now, as I mentioned, Moscow police released its first batch of investigative reports hours after the sentencing. Back on November 13th of 2022, Moscow police had a whodunit on their hands when they were called to 1122 King Road. all they knew was that a man in all black had been seen in the home. The first officer on the scene found Xana Kernodle laying in her bedroom, wearing a sweatshirt and underwear. She had defensive wounds on her hands, and the autopsy would later reveal that Xana had been stabbed more than 50 times. She fought for her life. Ethan Chapin was laying in Xana's bed. He had been stabbed in his sleep, and there was a large amount of blood around him and Xana. The bed was soaked. The autopsy showed that Ethan was killed when Kohberger used his knife to stab him, hitting an artery. And upstairs on the 3rd floor, as we know by now, the officers found best friends Kaylee Gonsalves and Maddie Mogan in the same bed. But the officer didn't realize what he was seeing. Kaylee's face was so badly damaged, she was unrecognizable. She had been stabbed more than 20 times. Maddie was asleep when she was stabbed and had no defensive wounds. But then the officer found a clue, something at the back of the home, outside of the sliding glass door. Officer Corbin Smith wrote, "I was assigned to hold security at the rear slider door. This was the alleged point of entry of the suspect. I observed very large footprints in the snow. I used a tape measure, and the shoe size measured approximately 13.5 to 14 inches, and the footsteps went to and from the rear slider door. I observed the trail of footsteps head away from the slider, then turn right around a stump in the backyard and lead toward the front of the house. I observed a set of small prints on the window to the east of the slider. The screen to this window appeared damaged and was laying on the ground. I located smudged fingerprints on the glass slider door." Surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen spoke at the sentencing about the trauma she has suffered. She saw Bryan Kohberger in the home that morning.
What happened that night changed everything. Because of him, 4 beautiful, genuine, compassionate people were taken from this world for no reason. He didn't just take their lives. He took the light they carried it into every room. He took away how they made everyone feel safe, loved, and full of joy. He took away the ability for me to tell him that I love him and that I'm so proud of them.
Dylan told police in November of 2022 that she heard a scream at 4 a.m. and she believed it was Kaylee. She told the detective she heard Kaylee scream and say somebody was in the house. The officer says that Dylan heard commotion and then locked herself in the bedroom. Dylan said she heard Kaylee run from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor bedroom, and then a man say, "You're going to be fine. I'm going to help you." Dylan told the detectives that it was really strange because the man said it, but it wasn't in a nice way. Then Dylan said she opened her door, and the guy was right there. She told police he saw her and she saw him, and he just left. Dylan described the man, who we now know is Bryan Kohberger, as wearing all black and a mask, and he had a bulge of sorts near his abdomen. She thought it might actually be a gun. Dylan then said she called Bethany Funk, the second surviving roommate. Dylan said that Bethany told her she heard a loud boom that she thought was a firework, and then Kaylee's dog Murphy started barking. Dylan also told police that they regularly locked their doors. The documents reveal that 5 days after the murders, detectives discovered the video of the white Hyundai Elantra from the surveillance camera at the home next door to 1122 King Road. A detective said he first saw the white car pull into the neighborhood at 3:56 a.m. and then speed out of the neighborhood at 4:20 a.m. That video would become a key part in piecing together the timeline of the murders and identifying the white Hyundai Elantra driven by Bryan Kohberger. As the investigation continued, police interviewed a number of people, and no one, absolutely no one, could think of anyone who would want to hurt Maddie, Kaylee, Ethan, or Xana. Detectives interviewed people who were at the Corner Club bar that night where Maddie and Kaylee had been hanging out. One man was kicked out because he had creeped out Maddie. There was discussion about Kaylee seeing a man outside of the King Road house when she took her dog outside one night, and lighthearted talk about her possibly having a stalker, but police found no evidence to support that. Police also investigated a number of people. One report says on 11/12/2022, the man left his dorm room at 12:05 hours. He was wearing a black long-sleeve shirt and black sweats. At 12:53 hours, the man returned. At 15:03 hours, the man left again wearing a black beanie, black gloves, and a white jacket. At 19:48 hours, he returned to the dorm without the beanie, gloves, and jacket, but then left again at 19:52 hours with a backpack. The man was gone until 11/13/22 at 12:25 hours when he returned to the dorm. I reported the information to Idaho State Police. Now, remember that Facebook account that belonged to a man named Papa Roger? He had posted on Facebook about the murders a lot, and some believed he had inside information about the crimes. And some believed for years that Bryan Kohberger was actually Papa Roger taunting people by posting about the murders. Now police are dispelling that myth.
Right. There was no connection. There wasn't at all. We looked into every bit of it. We took a deep dive into it. We researched it.
It wasn't him?
It was not. It was not.
And police say they also found no evidence that Kohberger followed the victims on social media. And they say he was actually using software to regularly clean his phone and computer.
We had the world's foremost experts on this look into it, and there was evidence that he had used software to wipe many of his devices relatively effectively, so there wasn't much evidence obtained after that.
He regularly used software to try to clear things off. He used VPN on his devices also.
One big question remains. Why did Bryan Kohberger pick these victims and the house on 1122 King Road to commit such a heinous crime? Investigators claim they still don't know why.
You know, after working in Moscow for several years as Chief Dollinger, that area is frequented by many, many people at all hours of the night when college is in session. So what Darren and I have surmised is that perhaps it's the old hiding in plain sight. There's lots of people around. There's lots of vehicles around at all hours. It's not isolated where you'd be noticed. So that's where that comment comes from.
It does. And no, it doesn't make sense. And it's if you're in that neighborhood at all, it's a very complicated neighborhood. It's very closed in. But at the same time, there's everything from college kids to adults that live there, people that have full-time jobs, part-time jobs. So any one of us could come and go and fit in there.
And what about the murder weapon and clothing that Bryan Kohberger wore the night of the murders? It sounds like those items will never, ever be found.
There is no evidence that we found that would lead us to any specific, even general location as to where the murder weapon or the clothes have been. And we searched. I mean, the FBI, again, to their credit, we had folks doing soil samples and so all sorts of things to try to come up with somewhere to start searching for these things, and we just never found it. As far as the forensics piece, I'll let Darren speak to
Yeah,
that.
and on the weapon, it wasn't a lack of trying. Everywhere that we had evidence of where he went, based upon phone records, based upon the evidence that we had gathered, we searched that. We went there. We did searches on the ground, in the water. We did searches. We sent soil samples to try to figure out maybe where a shovel had been used. So we searched everywhere that we possibly could, but the reality is we're looking for a singular small, it's not that small, but K-bar knife, and that's it. So it's endless of where it could have been, and we just were not able to find it.
This raises a big question. Why didn't prosecutors require Bryan Kohberger to disclose this information as a condition of his plea agreement? I asked Bill Thompson.
The law does not give the court or us the power to require a specific factual allocution. And just let me finish. And we recognize that. We recognize that we could have said, well, in order for us to move forward, we want a factual allocution. But I have to be perfectly candid. I don't believe that there's anything that would come out of his mouth that would be the truth. I don't believe that there's anything that would come out of his mouth that would be anything other than self-serving. And I don't believe there's anything that would come out of his mouth that would not further victimize the families. And so that just simply wasn't a factor. We made our decision based on our assessment of law and the facts. We made our decision based on being able to obtain accountability and certainty, not just for the victims' families, but for the communities and for the state. And that's where our obligations go. In the end, And the old Harry Truman thing, the buck stops on my desk. Well, that's what I got when I was elected prosecutor 33 years ago. I never dreamed it would involve something like this, but we don't shirk our responsibilities just because it got big and nasty.
In March of last year, police talked to a woman who said she met Bryan Kohberger on Tinder in the fall of 2022. She said they talked about horror movies, and he actually asked her what she thought the worst way to die would be, and she responded, a knife. The woman told police that Kohberger responded like a K-bar, but she had no idea what that was, and she had to Google it. The woman said she had stopped talking to Kohberger because he made her uncomfortable. The two had actually planned to meet when he went home for the holidays. Throughout the investigation, detectives have spoken to a number of people, including an inmate who was housed in the Latah County Jail with Bryan Kohberger. He called him the smartest person he'd met in jail, but also said he was a weirdo who constantly washed his hands and showered for nearly an hour. He said Kohberger was up all night and sometimes slept during the day. Police also wrote about another inmate who was being transported to prison and was recorded on video, telling another inmate he believed Kohberger committed the murders, and he could tell by the look in his eye. The inmate was quoted as saying he would hurt Kohberger if it wouldn't put him in legal jeopardy. And Moscow police and other agencies are expected to release more records in the days and weeks ahead, so more information will be revealed. Bryan Kohberger has been transferred officially to the maximum security prison in Idaho.
And that's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.